Hi, I'm Sonia Jante.
I'm Tom Henschel.
And I'm Kimberly Lane. And together we're unlocking leadership. We're three experienced executive coaches with very different disciplines. In every episode, we take a question from a real client and provide key insights to address their challenges from our three different perspectives. It's a holistic approach to understanding challenges and opportunities. Let's get to it. Our question today is from Sylvia in Santa Fe, one of my favorite places. My brother, who works in an entrepreneurial environment, told me his company recently conducted a now what workshop to brainstorm the key areas that will change for them. If you were asked by our company to facilitate that conversation, what would you do? Tom, I think this is right up your alley on facilitation. What would you suggest? What are your ideas?
Well, I have a lot of ideas. This is one of those questions that feels like there's so much packed into it. But I'm going to break it into two different parts. So, wow. First off, Sylvia, I'm so glad you asked because I think there's an idea here, which is you could do this. And I want to say, yes, you can. Here's something that I think has been transformative. So I started facilitating. Oh my God, I'm about to date myself. Okay, hang on.
Long time.
I started facilitating when there were binders of activities, and I have some of them on my desk right now. These big binders that were full of, 3-ring binders with activities of team building activities. And if your team needed this, you would do that. And they were fantastic, but they were very particular for us. They were not meant really for the basic team leader. And then came liberating structures. Do either of you know liberating structures? Oh, good. Oh, I can't wait to tell you. Okay. So there were a group of people who said, look, meetings are great, but what tends to happen in meetings is the same few people speak first, speak most often, and you can work on the other people, but they're slower. They're always going to be slower to contribute. That not everybody's voice gets heard, and it's hard to make that happen in a meeting. Mm-hmm. Liberating structures created these exercises that gets every voice talking and working towards something that's the team is trying to do together. Mm-hmm. And they're fantastic. And they're all written for people like Sylvia. Do you know what I mean? It's like, or for any of us, like the first time I went on that site, I was like, these are friendly and good and they work. So that's the first idea that I would say to Sylvia is this. Your brother did an exercise called What Now or Now What, right? That's what his facilitator called it to them. There's no one way of doing that. There's millions of ways of doing that. Depends on the facilitator you're going to get. And looking at something like liberating structures is going to give you a lot of ideas. So that's where I would start, Sylvia, on this road of facilitation. I don't know. What did either of you have in mind?
I'll tell you what came to mind when Sylvia asked the question. And I wrote a book over COVID called Integrative Leader. And it's based on asking a series of questions to help integrate both sides of the brain. And I really thought to myself, so if I was facilitating a workshop like that, well, what would I focus on? And I decided that I'd focus on 3 of the questions, and I'll correlate them to how I see it. And so one of my questions in the book is where? You want to have situational awareness. What's really going on right now? And then what? What's the return on investment or whatever? And then why? What is the purpose of doing this? So I thought to myself, I would basically structure something around those 3 questions. And specifically on the where, I would basically want to know and go around the room. And depending on how large your group is, how large the company is, you might break it down into smaller groups so that 5 or 6 people at a time, and they all get to participate in this way. And then they get to present to the rest of the group, sort of a summary. But I think that it's important for all of us as we're now like thinking of now what, we would take a look and say, okay, where am I personally and professionally? And so we would be able to give, if you will, a little bit of a summary to everybody that we work with or that's part of the organization we're a part of where are we? Because we've all gone through some kind of a change.
I want to be sure I understand what you're saying. You're saying individually that I should be able to say that
individually
for myself.
Yeah, personally and professionally. So I'm going to just give some examples. So like potentially one would say personally, I've come to the conclusion that family is really important, or I've come to the conclusion that I live in too small of a house, or whatever it is that one came to learn about oneself and what that means in terms of yourself moving forward. If I was to be answering that question personally, I would say I've come to understand how important the immune system is. And so I have really looked and evaluated a lot of ways to fortify my immune system because I feel like it's my responsibility to do so. On the professional side, for all of us, things changed professionally. We either started communicating differently, we could no longer go to work. And so based on that, what is it that now that means? Because potentially in the workforce, that may mean that I now am working with different groups. I have a different, if you will, set of structure that I'm involved with. So once we go around the room and gather all the information from everybody about what has changed personally and professionally, then we will get a sense of how much all of us can sort of understand and be, providing perspectives to others about the experience. In many cases, somebody might frame something one way, somebody another way. I think that's a good basis to then take a look from a bigger picture of, so again, where is the business now? I would say that if you were in the, people that were critical workers or essential workers, potentially what you experienced was a tremendous amount of growth and demand for your services in your situation. And if you were not, then potentially that demand went different. So what happens is now we can then assess where we all are, and then we can take a look at what's going on in our specific space, our company, our industry, whatever. And then we can say, so what does that mean now for us? Like if you were in the restaurant business, what does it mean? It means that we're like, in addition to doing in person, we're also doing takeout and we're doing 50-50 or whatever it is. And then you go into why, like when you're making changes, dramatic changes, transformative changes, the questions you have to ask yourself often is, so what can we do different now? What can we do different now? And I think that's sort of a place to take a look at it, because if people get to process, I think of it as like the 3-step process is like you get to decompress, you get to sort of show up your cards and everybody's puzzles are being put together. Then we get to look at the what. So what does this mean for our world right now in terms of our business and what we can plan on? And then why do we want to do this? Or why should we start putting certain things into the equation? I think that becomes a little bit more centered on purpose and a little bit more centered from a place of reality of where we really are today. So that would be a take that I would follow and build from that, depending on what the organization needed.
Interesting. I took a very basic, if I'm going to facilitate, Sylvia, your brother's meeting to create a brainstorming session that truly was a brainstorming session full of great ideas. I felt it's important as a great facilitator, you need to set the stage, you need to set some ground rules for this particular meeting, right? So in order to have free flowing entrepreneurial ideas and full-on creativity, some of the ground rules have to be, if this is truly a brainstorming session, no wrong answers. You should have somebody with a whiteboarding what everybody's saying with no filter. So someone can call out, we need to change colors of the office. I don't know what it is, but there are no wrong answers. And you have to establish that psychological safety in agreement with every single person in that room, that it's really a truly brainstorming session. And because you mentioned it's an entrepreneurial environment, I'm making the assumption that majority of those people in that room are comfortable with risk taking, with being vocal, with being creative, with being innovative, with thinking outside the box. Now what you're trying to do is just capture those out of the box ideas. So again, start with a whiteboard, make sure you've got somebody assigned in the room who's scribing the notes for the meeting, that collectively have that. And afterwards, you're going to take pictures of whatever's been whiteboarded. So again, no rules, no judgment, no filters, no limitations. And we can talk about what you do after you've gone through that brainstorming session, but then also along with what Sonia's talking about, do you need to have some categories or format or compartments for the content. And so I always like to look at people, process, and strategy. And so, now what's going to change on the people part of that? That could be internally as far as employees, how they interact now that we're in a potentially hybrid environment or whatever environment's going on in your workspace. How are people going to be affected? How are we going to interact with clients differently, right? Are we doing more Zoom calls versus in-person sales meetings? What's going on? The process piece, maybe the way you guys submit RFPs or manage legal issues or financial data is going to be different because of a hybrid workplace or the more regulations that are out there. And then third, the strategy piece of it, as a result of the people in the process, what's going to change in your strategy? And is it a short-term strategy or is it a long-term strategy? When do you go back to revisit that strategy to make sure it's still fitting, right? And what are your check marks and metrics against that strategy? So I kind of took it as if you're going to facilitate, literally get in the room and get the meeting going and get people talking and make sure you capture really good, innovative ideas. What are the basics we're going to do? So that's kind of where I will start.
That's great. I love that because it's very encouraging. And I think sometimes leaders are shy about it, reluctant about it. I just want to say that I know that feeling. I got to tell this story because it just was ended up being very permissive, as upsetting as it was at the moment. I'd been working on my facilitation skills for a long time, and then I got a team leader asked me to do something with her team, and I was like, oh, I don't know how I would do that. I mean, like, that's a really interesting problem to solve, but I don't have a tool for that. So I call this friend of mine, and she's the one who tells me about liberating structures. And she says, you need to go on their website. There's this thing called TRIZ, and it's the perfect exercise for what you're asking for. And I go, no kidding. Wow. So I discover liberating structures. I discover TRIZ, and I read TRIZ. And here's the problem. I read it and I go, I totally understand what they're like asking me to do. It's like a really basic recipe. But I thought about it and I was like, I don't think this works. You know what I mean? Like, I don't think this is actually going to get us where I want us to get us or where the team leader wants us to get to, So I call my friend and I go, I don't think it works. And she was like, oh, calm down. Go do the exercise. Just shut up, So I get in front of this team and this exercise is going to be like one of the anchor points of the day. And I'm thinking, I don't know if this works. And it did. It was fantastic. And it worked. And by the way, I use it all the time now.
So help me understand, because I've never heard of this liberating structure. Are there some key components around that or this TRIZ?
So TRIZ is an exercise that it would be like a recipe. You would read the instructions and you would get a bunch of people to do a certain set of things in sequence, leading to a particular outcome. Mm-hmm. And it's, by the way, TRIZ is, I don't know, it's some Russian, it started in Russia. Somebody got it from a Russian facilitator. I don't know where this thing came from, but TRIZ is this little formula that's on the website. And by the way, Liberating Structures, they want you to have this stuff. It's all free. They are a big kind of...
it's a company. Liberating Structure, I thought was the process.
Thank you for, okay. I'm so sorry. It's liberatingstructures.com. And it's not a company. It's a collective of people who push wisdom out. They want nothing other than for you to have these tools. And it's really, the website's really helpful and friendly, but it's written for civilians. So you can do it. And this idea, but like yours, which is, people, process, and strategy. That's a great way to think of buckets. I mean, whatever you find, I just want leaders I want to say that's unlocking leadership, right? Is stepping up, leading your people. Go do something, get an objective and do it.
Yeah. I mean, you can come up with your own buckets. I mean, or new terms for people, process, and strategy. Yeah. But I think, facilitation is too, in addition to obviously allowing for the brainstorming piece of it, and then also documenting that you have that so you can vet out the brainstorming ideas and eventually, that's probably the next meeting you're going to have, is vetting all those brainstorming ideas and kind of voting on which ones to pursue. But I think it's important, and I can't remember if Tom, you mentioned it, or Sonia did, but even though most of those people in that room are going to be creative and entrepreneurial in mindset and probably have great ideas, probably not everybody's going to be comfortable speaking up. And there's going to be those few that like to over talk, right? So I think as a leader and a facilitator, making sure that everybody gets an opportunity to share their idea, even if it means those that are not comfortable write it down and then it gets, spoken by somebody else.
Can I just say there's a really simple thing that I learned early in the pandemic that was so helpful. I've completely stolen it, by the way. I use this all the time now as a facilitator, which is I'll pose the question as the facilitator. I'll pose the question and then say, because assuming this is a Zoom meeting, everyone put yourself on mute for 60 seconds, including me. Mm-hmm. And it just gives people time to, especially people who like to turn inwards and be thoughtful, or maybe even make notes. 60 seconds is a long time. You can do it. Mm. And then when you start, everybody's kind of starting from the same starting place. And it was really, it's been really helpful.
I like it.
Yeah.
Perfect. 60 seconds to solution. I like it. Okay, good. Wonderful.
Yeah.
So obviously I go straight into the content. Well, I guess the part that I agree with both of you in that is, yes, you do need to have rules of engagement. And yes, when it's a brainstorming session, the assumption is everybody's ideas are welcome. And so we need to be able to put them all up there. The reason that I was focused on the way that I did is I think that unlike any other time that anybody may have lived through, what we've lived through over the last 18 months has some permanent changes that have occurred for us personally and for the organization and the environment we're going to work in. Where we're traveling is different, where we're eating is different, how we're investing our money is different. There's so many things that have changed that there has to be a forum in which that can be brought out to just allow people to just sort of think about it. And then from that, you can then organize. But if people are sitting there, I always think it's like, have you ever seen those pictures where they show the iceberg and that you only see the top, a little bit of it? And to me, it's like, you got to get for all that stuff down below out first so that you can actually really build the real solution. But
one of the things that has been an interesting challenge for me, because, I've always done a lot of facilitation every year. That's always been a large part of my business. Mm-hmm. And it's been joyous for me. I've really enjoyed it and learned a lot, and it's been fun. To figure out how to do that online has been an interesting challenge.
Big
just really interesting. Mm-hmm. And I've gotten to see some fantastic team leaders who are leading their teams where they've got their teams cracking. I mean, they're really good at it. It's like, good, it can happen. It takes effort.
What is the secret of leaders? What would you say?
I think they've taught them really good Zoom etiquette, which is just because you're on mute doesn't mean you get to not speak. Just because you're on mute, you don't sit back in your chair and stop thinking. And he's got a team that's like popcorn. They're all talking all the time, and they all practice pretty good etiquette. They put themselves on mute and off mute really fast, and they're engaged. You can see it physically. They're engaged. So,
how many people on his team?
I want to say 12, but it might be 10.
Yeah, because facilitating a group of 25 is easy still to do in a room. Maybe at 5 tables of 5, even if you have to break them up. But to try to do 25 people on a Zoom is very challenging because you can't even you're losing the eye contact if you're trying to see everybody from a picture perspective of what the person that's talking, right? And I find that engagement piece is very challenging if you start to get to maybe more than 12 people on a Zoom piece of it. It's just, I feel like the less, 4 to 12 is max, right? It's just a different.
But I'll tell you, I've done, teams of 60. And to me, the trick is just to get them into breakout rooms as fast as you can, because then it's like the little tables. And in some ways, Zooms is so helpful for that, because
it makes it easy. People are used to it. Yeah. It's
right.
People know. Yeah.
So I think that's the gift, is something that you actually can't do in a room, is to actually get, it's hard Anyway, I love Zoom for that. But then you have to keep getting them back in the rooms pretty fast. You have to teach them to contribute some download time, as you would in a big room, by the way. Right?
Yeah, you got to
Some
get a
people are gonna-
spokesperson for the breakout room to communicate the ideas
Right.
from the team. So, you get it's more of a facilitation of groups then versus just facilitation of individuals, because now it's more, you've got to, I want to say group think to an extent. You've got, your five.
just more participants.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
So, but I want to go back to Sylvia's thing here, which is I have no idea how big Sylvia's team is or what she was expecting, but what I'm hoping is this, that whether she decides to do something herself or whether she works with someone like us or whatever, I think what's really important is to get really, really, really clear on what's the prescription for the team, that the team leader look at her team like she's the doctor, they're the patient, and what's the weak point, what are you trying to make stronger, and what's the prescription, and then let your facilitator say, well, here's what I think we can do. And I think that's what good facilitators do. So Sylvia, number one, I hope you find someone like that, right? Wouldn't that be nice? And yeah.
You're kind of speaking of, Tom, to begin with the end in mind, make sure people are clear on what the final objective is. And,
Yes.
We're here to collect over 200 brainstorming ideas on how we can, we can survive better from people, process, and strategy in a hybrid work environment. And we need 200 great ideas or whatever, or build the most innovative
Wow.
project, to an innovative widget that's going to solve the biggest problem for working in a hybrid environment. I'm throwing stuff out. That's a brainstorm right there.
Yeah, that was impressive.
Right. That was a brainstorm. So yeah, I think, beginning with the end in mind is good old Stephen Covey is a great tool. People like to know what they're working towards. So, and when they know they've completed it. So,
But it also helps the facilitator. If I don't know what we're doing, I cannot help us, right? And yeah, so.
Yeah, just right. Yep. We've got 199 brainstorming ideas. We just need one more, and then you all get to go. So
now we know how Kimberly motivates the group. Thank you, Sylvia from Santa Fe, for your question today. We hope you, our viewers and listeners, gain new insights on what to expect in a Now What workshop. To our listeners, if you like the content we shared today, please like this episode and also share and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Unlocking Leadership-askthecoaches.com. We look forward to reading your reviews. You can also find Unlocking Leadership-Ask the Coaches on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. If you have a leadership question or would like to reach out to the coaches, please email us at info@unlockingleadership-askthecoaches.com. We would love to hear from you. Thank you for joining us today. Tune in next time to find the keys to unlocking your best leadership.